Hi everybody, my name is Lindsay Evans. I'm enrolled in Japanese 290 here at California State University, San Bernardino, and today I'll be talking about Japanese folklore and ancient and modern storytelling. So first things first, I just want to give some background on the context of Japanese folklore. The first written Japanese folktale was the tale of the bamboo cutter in the 10th century, although historians believe the tale was far older than that and it was just the first time that it had been written down. Japanese folklore is heavily influenced by Shinto and Buddhism, and folklore in Japan is divided into 7 categories, which include ancient stories, funny stories, sad stories, ghost stories, witty stories, stories about greed, and stories about repaying kindness. Folklore usually centers around interactions between people and spirits, gods, talking animals, regular animals, monsters, that kind of thing. Ancient forms of storytelling usually focus around acting or pictures, as most people in ancient times did not have access to printed literature as it was very expensive or rare, or they might just not have been able to read at all. So the first ancient form of storytelling that I'm going to talk about today is Nogaku, which translates to monkey fun. Nogaku is a type of theater performance that uses dance and costuming to tell a story. Nogaku is notorious for the use of masks to depict old people, spirits, and women, as the performers are usually male. There's 2 different forms of Nagaku. There's No and Kyogen. No is more serious, more historical, more sad tales that use a lot of the costuming and the masks to really narrate the story. And Kyogen is a little bit more lighthearted and humorous, and they use a little bit more dialogue than No does to tell a story. Uh, Nagaku is still a recognized form of theater. You can find all kinds of Nagaku theaters today in Japan, obviously, but they're also very popular in the United States and Canada as well. So these are just some examples of Nagaku theater. The left image has the masks and the costuming, and you can tell it's very dramatic. And then the right is just a picture of a mask that would be used in a Nagaku performance. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is bunraku, which translates to puppetry and storytelling. Bunraku has origins in the 8th century but became popular in the 17th century after the first bunraku theater was opened in Osaka, Japan by Takemoto Gyatu. This form of theater was enjoyed mostly by commoners as puppet shows could be put on anywhere, including street corners or busy plazas. Uh, and they would most often tell classic tales. Bunraku is usually used to tell humorous tales and also stories based on Giri and Ningo, which is the conflict between social obligation and human emotion. Unlike some other Japanese theater arts, Bunraku uses a lot of music to push a narrative. So as you can see, these puppets are pretty large. And on the right side, you see the man that would be controlling the puppet, and he would also provide the voice for the puppet during the show. So the last form of old school storytelling that I'm going to talk about is kamishibai, which is a form of storytelling where traveling performers would go from town to town on a bicycle, and they would go and sell candy and small toys to children. Candy was a form of an admission ticket. Once a child had purchased the candy, they would sit on the ground in front of the kamishibai man, who had a wooden frame attached to the back of his bicycle and would use paper panels and a wooden frame to narrate a story. One side was covered in the illustration, the other side was printed with the passage of the story. These stories would almost always end in a cliffhanger, and that way the Kamishibai man would be ensured that the kids would continue to buy candy from him and he would continue the story after that. So this is a really cool photo of a modern Kamishibai man. As you can see, he's got the image in the wooden frame and he would slide new images over that one. Kamishibai tales are usually tales directed towards children, so they're usually really heavy in morals and learning from your mistakes and taking care of your family. So now I'm going to talk about modern storytelling in Japan. We're pretty familiar, I'm sure, with these two forms, manga and anime. Uh, Japan has history of manga that goes all the way back to the early 19th century, but it became popular after World War II, after American soldiers has visited with their comic books, and it kind of took on a new shape that resembled more of a Western comic book. Anime also became popular in the middle of the 20th century. Anime is a form of Japanese animation that's used in both cartoons and full length feature films. Both of these became popular around the world in the 80s and 90s after introductions of shows and movies such as Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon and My Neighbor Totoro. So these are just some images of one of my favorites, which is Sailor Moon. The left is from the manga and the right is from the anime. So now I just want to take a moment and talk about some of my favorite modern storytellers in Japan. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Hayao Miyazaki, who is an animator, writer, and director. He began Studio Ghibli in the 80s. He bases his stories off of old Japanese folk tales that his grandma and his mother would tell him as a child. His movies take places in fantasy settings that feel familiar. They're very much geared towards children and often contain themes of family and loyalty and honor. So this is just an image of Hayao Miyazaki himself, and then the right is a still from his film Howl's Moving Castle. This is one of my absolute favorites. And the last person I'm going to talk about is Junji Ito. Junji Ito is a horror manga artist. He loved Ghost and Kanji, which is like a Japanese monster. He loved those stories as a child and used them as inspiration for his work. Some of his works have been turned into animes, but he is not an animator himself. He just focuses on writing and illustrating manga. So on the left is Junji Ito, and on the right is a picture from his manga called Gyo, which is about a failed government experiment. I thought it was important to talk about these two storytellers as they are kind of changing and evolving how Japanese folklore is told today. Japanese folklore is now accessible to everyone around the world. It's beloved by very many people, not just in Japan, but also outside of Japan because of artists like Junji Ito and Hayao Miyazaki. And these are just my references. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this presentation about Japanese folklore and storytelling. It was fun to create. It was fun to learn about.